Okay, I'll bring the equipment over and we'll talk about an interesting way of making nukes that some of you are probably not familiar with. Now, something you all have to keep in mind as you're listening to me talk is not everybody does things the same, okay? What works for me may not be the best for you, and vice versa. Even when both methods are perfectly fine, the way I think might be different than the way you think. So try to be open-minded when you watch this. And it can be confusing, honestly. I'm going to try to say it as simple and as clearly as I can. And you're welcome to ask questions as we go along because it can be confusing at first. Am I right?
I think it's pretty good.
You think it's pretty simple? Okay. We'll ask the people here in a minute.
No, not simple, but it's good.
It is good.
Understand it.
Once you understand it, we have a new employee, and just this morning, Tommy and I were trying to explain to her how we do this. We did it for the first time this morning. It took her about 10 or 15 minutes to figure this thing out, but once she got it, she says, yeah, I get it. That's a unique piece of equipment. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Advantages and disadvantages to this method. One of the disadvantages is you do need a few pieces of extra equipment. You need a queen excluder, you need an empty box, and you need that thing right there, a divider board. Now, I don't use screen bottom boards, but I always try to bring one so the brand new beekeepers can see what one looks like. There's just as many reasons to use a screen bottom board as there are to not use a screen bottom board. Don't let somebody tell you that you have to do one way or the other. It's up to you to learn the merits and make up your own mind. And quite frankly, that's beekeeping in a nutshell. I say this almost every time I speak, that beekeeping is 50% science and 50% art. And the art part of beekeeping is, in fact, Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines art as skill acquired by experience. And with time, you will learn a lot of things that you don't read in the books, and that's all about you and your intuition and the way your brain works. So don't let anybody steer you into one way and one way only. It's up to you to learn all the information you can and come up with what works best for you. But I just wanted the new beekeepers to see a screen bottom board. I don't use them. I'll just stop right there. That's one of those places like queen excluders. You can argue about that all night. Box of 10 frames. We do this usually with two-story colonies. So what I'm going to ask everybody to do is to imagine that this thing is full of bees and brood, that it's late March and it's probably going to swarm here in a week or two or start building swarm cells, okay? So what we're going to do, we usually put a lid on the ground or another box or something so we're not setting the box right on the ground. I'm going to set one box to one side and one box to the other side. I'll try not to smash your phone. And then I'm going to put an empty box. This has foundation in it, but I'm going to take that out right now. I'm just going to put a completely empty box in the original position. Okay, we got the bottom box, which hopefully is full of brood. We have the top box, which has got some brood and a lot of food in it, I hope. I probably should back up a little bit and explain how we got to this point. And in the article I say this, I say that the beekeeper's calendar begins in August, and that what you do from that point forward sets the stage for success in the fall, the winter, the spring, and beyond. If you don't do the right work in August, you may not have a big strong colony right now in March to split, okay? That includes heavy feeding if they're light. It includes mite control. It includes queen inspection. If the queen's not doing a really good job, you'll want to replace her in August so she has time to build the colony up before winter. Get that colony in good shape before winter. so often I hear beekeepers, we have a retail store at our location, and we have a pretty steady flow of people coming in asking us why did their bees die last winter when it's full of honey, they couldn't have possibly starved to death. And my first question is, did you treat for mites? Did you do this? How was the queen? And well, I don't know. No, I didn't treat for mites. I mean, all of these questions, they don't know. And that's the reason that they don't have a good colony in the spring. Okay. Let's just say after looking at the calendar and looking at the conditions that I've decided I want 5 frames of brood in this bottom box because that is what I think will peak 10 days after the honey flow. Bottom box should have some pretty good full sheets of brood in it, so I might choose to take 3 out of the middle of the bottom, maybe 2 of these out of the top that have that band of honey around the top. I'll put the biggest frames of brood in the middle and the smaller ones towards the outside. So right now, I've got 5 frames of brood in this colony. Then I'm going to finish it off with other drawn comb and frames of food. And when I say food, I mean everything. You want pollen and honey. It's ideal to have pollen in all your both in the nuke that we're going to make and the mother colony. But if you have a choice and you have not a lot of pollen to go around, I would choose to put it in the nuke because, as she said earlier, you're going to lose your field force, and it could be several days before they have a good population of foragers to go out and get things like pollen, whereas the mother original colony will have foragers.
Where's the queen?
Well, we're going to get to that in a minute.
But we already took the boxes apart. Didn't
We did. I kind of do this a little backwards. I probably should, but here's what I say next. Your good timing. As I put all of these frames in this bottom box, I was on the lookout for the queen. If I saw her, everything's hunky-dory. I know she's in the bottom box. But let's act like I didn't see her. And this is the beauty of this method. If you are a new beekeeper and you're intimidated by a 2-story colony full of bees, and how in the world are you going to find this queen, that's where this method really shines, because you don't have to find her. You look for her as you work. Let's just act like you didn't see her, and then we'll go on to this phase 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this funnel on top of the bottom colony. You can use an empty deep super as a funnel too, but we make one out of a container. I buy these things at Home Depot. It's a 64-quart plastic tub, and we cut the bottom out and cut a section out of a piece of plywood and glue it in there. You can use a deep box as a funnel too. You don't need this fancy thing right here. Just wanted to show you what we use though, so you'd know. Okay, you're still watching for the queen while you do this. If she's not on there, shake every single bee into this funnel and move the frames over again and again and again. Now, if you do see her, you're done shaking. You just take her and put her in the bottom box, you're done shaking. The goal here is to make absolutely 110% positive that the queen's in that bottom box. And you don't have to see her if you shake every single bee down that funnel. When you're all done and every bee's in there, you know the queen has to be in there.
She won't crawl up.
No, she doesn't like the light. She will go down. Now, one thing you have to be careful about, a lot of people are too violent when they shake the bees. These bees have stomachs too. You don't want to slam them onto the top bars. You want to kind of shake like that instead of going blam. You can just hear them hit the top bars when you do that. It's really hard on them. Just shake. And I said this in the article, it's kind of a contradiction, and it seems like a contradiction, but you want to shake vigorously, but not violently, if that makes sense. So we've shaken all the bees off. All the bees are in the bottom box. Now we're going to put a queen excluder on, and you know that that queen is stuck in the bottom box, right? Now we're going to create the nuke. We make and sell 5-frame nukes. So what we like to do is start with 3 frames of brood. Ideally, we would like a frame of open brood in the middle. That would be larva, not pupa. That's where you'll find a concentration of nurse bees later on. That's going to attract nurse bees up through this queen excluder. And then we want sealed brood on either side of that. There'll be 3 frames total. The sealed brood is to help the nuke expand quicker. We want this thing to be done in 3 weeks and ready to sell. So we'll put that box on top with the 3 frames of brood in the middle. And then we'll find some food, preferably, remember I mentioned pollen, should be in the nuke if you have it. Honey and pollen on each side. And there's our 5-frame nuke, right? Well, I'm guessing everybody knows what's going to happen now, but we'll just continue on. We have a feeder in every double deep colony. You folks may not. This is a 1.5 gallon man lake cap and ladder feeder. We really like them, and you're going to see why we like them in a minute. So then we're going to finish the nuke off with 5 frames of foundation. And it's
Foundation with no comb.
you can use comb if you have it, but one of the neat things here is if you're putting 5 frames of foundation in this thing, you're cycling out that comb. Well, here's where the foundation really comes into play. This is going to be our 2nd story box, but not right now. Right now, what's going on is the 3rd story. The 3 drawn comb that are left over go in the top, in the middle. I know it's got to be getting confusing by now. And we'll put the lid on, and we're going to leave it overnight. We're going to walk away and come back tomorrow. Okay, the queen, 5 frames of brood, food and combs in the bottom, 5-frame nuke is in the middle, and the 2nd story of the colony is now on top. So now we come back a day later. By then, all the bees have come up through this excluder. They've all equalized across all the brood. Most of them will be in the bottom 2 boxes. You'll have a few in the top box. No problem there. So the next day, take the top off, and what I'm doing right now only takes about 60 seconds if you're good at this, not long at all. So we've already done all the hard work. We made our nuke. Take the nuke off, take the excluder off, put the 2nd story, which was our temporary 3rd story, on, fill it. I like to, at this point, fill this full of sugar syrup. That's why one of the reasons we like those feeders so well. Then we put a double screen divider board on. In the catalogs, you'll see them listed as a double screen board or a Snelgrove board. It's, if you're interested in this thing, we have a YouTube channel, which is Bob Binnie at Blue Ridge Honey Company. We have maybe 15 videos up there. We're putting one up every week. And one of them is on how we construct these things. If you're interested in these boards, it's just 4 minutes, and it's simply called Double Screen Divider Board. You can go there and check that out. Okay, it's got an entrance, right? And 2 screens. And now we're going to put the nuke on top. Introduce our queen, caged mated queen or queen cell. And we're going to fill this jar full of food and put it up there. Now I'm going to explain why we just went to all this trouble, some of the benefits of this. Some of the things that happened automatically without you even making them happen. We've rotated out 5 combs, so that's first and foremost, right? We've decreased the population of the colony to the point where it won't swarm before the honey flow starts. That happened automatically. When you put this box over this double screen, all of the old bees, the old forager bees, go home to the original entrance. Those are the bees that are feisty. Those are the bees that generally sting you. The more experienced beekeepers will tell you, I call it the bewitching hour. Probably the wrong way to put it, but you know, about 4 or 5 o'clock, the whole colony, its whole attitude changes. It gets more feisty, more defensive. That's because all the foragers came home. They're the bees that are harder to get along with. When they exit this entrance and go back home, the only bees that are left up here are the nurse bees, which are much more gentle. Some of them are so young they can't even sting yet. They are way more inclined to accept a new queen that you give them than if they would have been with the forager bees in there also. Does that make sense? Now, because of this exodus of older bees, if this nuke was just set out in the yard somewhere, if it was cool at night, they might not be able to take care of the brood in there. But with the double screen, the heat rises from the colony below and helps those bees up there take care of those 3 frames of brood. The feeder up here, whether they need feed or not, is to gorge these bees. Gorged bees will accept a queen much more readily than bees that are not. But you have to be careful. If you're feeding and you start a robbing frenzy, your queen acceptance just went way down. If you have multiple colonies in a yard, the more experienced beekeepers know that there are times when they just want to rob each other and fight. When robbing begins in a bee yard, all the colonies become very defensive and they're not very inclined to accept another queen. So if you do feed, you want to be very careful not to dribble sugar syrup all over the place when you put this jar in. We don't even turn it over until we get close to the hole, so anything that comes out of the holes right away goes down into the colony. So we've just enhanced queen acceptance also. The heat rising through this double screen board also helps this nuke grow faster. This thing will be ready a week quicker than it would have been if it wasn't over the double screen. The reason this board has 2 screens with a division in between them is that once this queen is accepted, the 2 queens can fuss through the screen if it's just a single screen. Yes, sir.
So just to reiterate, you had to add a queen to the top one.
Yeah, or in his case, he might have chose to let them rear their own.
It's like, could you do a notch, like a notch, or let them rear off of their open, let's say they might have an egg? Would they rear a queen, or would that queen scent still be prevalent?
He's asking about making a notch for them to make a queen. That's a whole different, completely different subject. Some people notch combs to get queen cells right at the bottom and harvest them. We're not trying to harvest anything here as far as queen cells go. One of the other reasons for a double screen is if you have a single screen and the bees in the top and the bees in the bottom can touch, they can share pheromones, and the top box may not realize that it's queenless. That's why there's a double screen. That's why there's a double screen, yeah.
Thank you. That's what the question I was asking.
Oh, okay.
Where's that queen scent coming from?
Anything in your feed other than just sugarwater?
We are very careful about that. There are times when we put Honeybee Healthy in our syrup, but if it's the potential for robbing is there, we do not, because Honeybee Healthy and lemongrass oil and all of that stuff is highly attractive, and you can start a robbing frenzy in a bee yard with that stuff real quick. So we do like to use this stuff for, medicinal purposes, but not when there's the possibility of robbing. Some of our apiaries have 64 colonies in them. If they get a whiff of that stuff, that place can come completely unglued. It's just a crazy house. So we avoid it during robbing season. But when they're not robbing, it's good to give it to them. It's good for them. We like Honeybee Healthy. We actually don't buy Honeybee Healthy. We just mix up our own lemongrass oil and spearmint oil. It works good. Now, something else happened here that's important to us that probably would not be important to almost all of you, but it's a good lesson. It's a good bit of information. When we raise our own queen cells, we might have 300 queen cells coming off in one day, on a Friday, let's say. And it may be impossible for us to make 300 nukes that day or the day before. If you start a nuke days ahead of introducing a queen or a queen cell, they're going to start emergency cells. And as soon as that's going to happen within 8 to 24 hours. Don't ask me why they don't do it at the same time, but some colonies will start it at 8 hours and some will wait a day, maybe 24 hours before they start those cells. Once they start an emergency queen cell, as that cell gets older and older, the odds of them accepting whatever you give them, whether it's a cell or a queen, steadily go down with the age of the emergency cell increasing. Now, remember when we made the nuke and it was the second story that it had no queen in it. In other words, it was queen free, but the bees did not understand themselves to be queenless because they still had the queen excluder to go through. The moment, and it only takes 60 seconds, the moment we do that reversal and put this board in there, that upper unit becomes queenless right then and there. And even if it's 4 or 5 days old, it still has not started emergency cells because they didn't understand themselves to be queenless, but they do the moment we put this thing in there. So that's a huge advantage to us because if, like, it's going to happen next week, it's going to pour on Thursday and Friday. If we were having to put cells in on Friday, we'd have to have all our nukes done by the end of Wednesday. We'd be leaving nukes out in the field that were 2 or 3 days old with no queen. They'd have emergency cells all over the place. So see, that's a big advantage for us. Smaller beekeepers, you can accomplish all this in one day and it's not a big issue. It only takes an hour or two for all of those bees to go back home to their original entrance. So in this case, we're fine. Once we reverse this thing, we'll put the queen in there immediately, right then and there. So they have a queen, there's queen pheromones present, and they will not begin emergency cells.
And so how do you introduce that queen in a cage?
Well, right now, for the next few weeks, we are using caged queens like we got from Chris Werner down there. But later on, we'll be introducing a queen cell. And when we introduce queen cells, we use queen protectors. It looks like a little thimble. Whenever bees try to kill a cell, they always do it from the side. That's why you can tell if a queen hatched or if they killed her. If she exited through the bottom, that means the queen hatched. If there's a hole in the side, it means either another queen or the bees killed her before she could hatch. And the reason we use a queen protector, in that hour or two that it takes them to realize they're queenless, they might get feisty and try to hurt that cell. With a cell protector, they cannot. Now with a caged queen, she's not going to get out of there in an hour or two, so that's okay. It's going to take them a day or two to eat their way through the candy, so we'll introduce it right away.
So they'll even kill a cell?
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
If you took
You
a
bet.
frame from another...
If they don't think they're queenless, they can tear down a cell real quick. Yeah. If you're going to raise your own queens in this situation, here's a little trick, and you probably know this already, but all larvae are capped within 6 days of hatching. In other words, you got 3 days of being an egg, the egg hatches, and there's 6 days of being a larva, and then it's sealed over. If you're raising your own queens and letting them have access to all types of different ages of larvae, sometimes in an emergency situation, they'll start queen cells from older larvae, maybe 2 or 3 days old. If you come back on the 4th day and kill all the cells that are sealed, guess what you just did? You just killed all the cells that were started from older larvae. Leave the cells that are unsealed and you'll have the better queens, the queens that were raised from a young larva. It's best if they get fed royal jelly from a very young age, preferably half a day old or even younger immediately. So that's a little trick to come up with better queens when you're letting the colony raise your own. It's a little bit of work. You have to go back 4 days later, but it's worth it because you'll get better queens. And if you're letting them raise their own queen, you definitely need to be feeding. We've seen over and over and over the proof that as long as we're feeding our cell builders that are building cells, we get much better queen cells. So you want to feed that nuke, no matter whether it's something that you put aside or up on the double screen board like this, whatever. You need to put a jar of food on it and you'll get better queen cells. And of course, if they're raising their own cells, you want pollen to be against that. They can't move pollen like they can honey and nectar. So wherever your frame of larva is or eggs that you're wanting to raise a queen from, you want pollen right against that, and that'll help you get better queens too. That was a whole bunch of information, I think. Well, so everybody's got information overload probably. Let's stop right at that point before we continue and say, are there any questions about what we've already talked about? And then we'll talk about anything you want.
Yeah. Okay, so what you just did, and let's say you're like us and we're not raising our own queens, and so you could either hope that they make one out of the eggs in there, or let's say you find some swarm cells on another frame in another colony.
She just opened up another can of
Do you have
worms.
to let them think that they're queenless before you can put that in, or will they kill it when you put
No,
it
she's talking about swarm cells. If you want to start a nuke with swarm cells, if you move that frame that has cells on it with the bees that are on the comb, the swarm cells will survive, and it'll work that way.
Okay, so you could actually do that in your top box? If you don't
Absolutely,
have-
with swarm cells. Let me show you, talk to you about another trick. This is a cool tool. I do not know why this is not used more in this country. We have a video up on our YouTube channel about expanding your apiary is the title of the video, and I just put it up 2 days ago, and I got a comment back today from a guy in Romania. It was in Romanian. I didn't know what he was talking about, so my daughter, who's a language whiz, I called her in New York and said, look at this and tell me what it says. And she said, he's saying that you described it beautifully, and he too is very puzzled why he calls them Snelgrove boards in Europe, why they're not used in the United States more. And I'm puzzled
You can't even
too.
buy them in an 8-frame. You can only get them in a 10-frame.
Is that right? Yeah. They're so cool. Now let me show you another trick we'll do. Let's say you run across a double deep colony that is just swarmed. Just swarmed, gone. The bees are gone, but it's full of queen cells. You're going to have, 9 times out of 10, you're going to have swarm cells on more than one frame, right? Okay. Leave some brood in a cell. We like to leave, we take all the cells out except for 2 because you can have after swarms. Virgin queens can hatch and swarm and in anticipation of the next virgin taking over. So we only leave 2 cells. We'll do 2 in the bottom with brood. We'll do 2 in the top with brood. And we'll put this second story on top, and you've now doubled your odds of getting a mated queen. A lot of people don't consider that when a colony swarms, you only have about a 75, in good conditions, maybe an 80% chance of the original colony requeening itself. You know, these queens go out into all kinds of precarious conditions, birds, dragonflies. There's a lot of stuff out there that can get a queen while she's mating. And if the bottom doesn't make it, maybe the top did, or vice versa. And all you have to do is 3 weeks later, when you figured out which half is going, just pull the board out and put it back together. Now what happens if both halves make it? Well, you just made another colony, okay? If you do this to 20 colonies, you're going to end up with 30 when you're done. I mean, each half has a 75% chance, right? So I consider that a harvest too. We look at everything we do as a harvest, a dollar sign, and I know that most of you probably don't do that. But when you can produce another colony, that's something you can sell or utilize for honey production or whatever. If it's in early enough in the spring, you can actually harvest it and sell it as a nuke in May or June. So we keep probably 10 or 20 of these on the truck at all times during swarming season. We run across a double deep that's swarmed, we just split it in half right then and there and move on. 3 weeks later, you hopefully have 2 queens, but if not, you at least maybe have 1, because your odds just went way up to get a mated queen. And by the way, swarm cells make the best queens, okay? They make the best queens, yeah. But there's a big, huge but in here. I was asked this in Cummings when I spoke a month or 2 ago. If you use swarm cells for producing nukes and you do it over and over and over, aren't you breeding for the tendency to swarm? Yes and no. So let's paint out a scenario here. Let's say you go into a bee yard and you got 20 colonies, and it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks before swarming season really should be upon you, and one colony is building swarm cells. That's the colony that has that trait. You don't want to use cells from that one you don't want to use the earliest cells. But let's say you go into a yard of 20 colonies and you're late and they're all plugged out and they have absolutely every reason to be building swarm cells. I feel it's okay to use, that's not